Hi, hello. I'm gonna clap. Hi there. Welcome to this low-energy video about a film that I just recently saw and loved quite a lot called Overlord. Overlord was delightful. It's an action horror film about a group of American soldiers who have to infiltrate a Nazi base during the invasion of Normandy, and they discover Nazis doing spooky things to spooky people, and it's really actually quite good. I've heard it described as compelling, as tightly written, as, just a whole lot of fun, and I gotta say I wholeheartedly agree with that. That hasn't stopped Overlord from, shall we say, just straight up bombing in the box office. This movie tanked. I'm experiencing similar emotions to when Blade Runner 2049 performed poorly at the box office. And honestly, I think both of these films failed for some of the same reasons. And I think that because of these reasons, both of these films, and specifically Overlord, was doomed to fail before production even began. Alright, here you go. I'm going to tell you why Overlord failed to appeal to wider audiences. Overlord inhabits this very special space where its premise is what sells the movie, but it's also what drives people away. I can't tell you how many times that I have suggested this film to people, and they've been like, oh, what's the plot? And I'm like, oh, it's really awesome, okay? It's about these American soldiers who have to parachute into Nazi-occupied France, and they have to blow up this Nazi base. And they're like, oh, that sounds cool. And I'm like, yeah, it is really cool. And there's this really compelling plot twist where you find out that the Nazis are conducting freakish genetic experiments on their own people in order to ensure the longevity of the 1,000-year Reich. And they're like, what? It is so interesting to me that the concept of Nazi zombies has been so prevalent and really a staple of the video game industry, and yet it has struggled to make any form of a footprint on cinemas. I mean, sure, you got your Dead Snow franchise, I'll give you that, but have you seen Dead Snow recently? Have you really taken a gander at it? Because I wouldn't really want that to be the flagship of my genre. What I'm trying to say is that it's bad. But let's pivot back to Overlord here, where audiences are currently avoiding it at what seems like a court-mandated distance. It has to be more than just the premise. It can't just be the premise that's driving people away, because there's plenty of, dumb movies with dumb premises that succeed at the box office. Like that one. I honestly believe that the reason Overlord is struggling is because there are people who have seen it, who have sat down and seen the movie, and they hate it. The professional reviews of this film are actually quite good, and I would also say that the audience reviews are fairly positive, but I think that where they differ is that there's a lot more caveats in the audience reviews, and these caveats are the things that I really disagree with, and I also think that they're the things that are keeping people from seeing this movie. There are three major criticisms of this film that I think are A, incorrect, or at the very least unfair, and B, what I think are truly contributing to the lack of interest and word of mouth being generated for this movie. And if we're going to get to the bottom of why I think that Overlord was doomed from the outset to fail, I have to address these three major criticisms, and I have to explain why I think that they're incorrect, and also why I'm not surprised that people would find them as problems. Number one, pacing issues. I watched this movie with two of my very best friends, and they really enjoyed the film too, but I kept noticing that when we were discussing it afterwards that they had a lot of problems with the pacing. This film opens in media res with a very robust airplane introduction scene. You got your characters, you got your motivations, you got your premise, you got everything set up all nice in a little bow, then boom! Airplane explodes. Our main character, Boyce, is thrust very violently out an airplane door. Is that what it's called? Is that what they're called now? And we have this really intense scene of him just parachuting through all this shrapnel and all this carnage, and then he lands and he almost drowns, and it's very intense. And then once he lands and meets up again with the rest of the principal cast, everything slows down. There is this very deliberate halt to the plot about 20 minutes into this movie. The same thing happened in Saving Private Ryan, which I would argue Overlord is heavily influenced by, and it's also a movie that received a lot of criticism for its pacing. But I gotta tell you, people love that opening scene of Private Ryan. They love that scene. Love it to death. I know people who will watch that movie and then turn it off after that scene is over. And those people are called sociopaths. But I think the critiques of Saving Private Ryan's pacing and the critiques of Overlord's pacing are wrong in very much the same ways. There's this thing about action movies where you're never really given enough time to become acquainted with the main characters. I don't think there's anybody out there that is like particularly attached to, say, Josh Duhamel's character in the Transformers franchise. And there's like one main reason for that, aside from, of course, the fact that those movies are terrible and you shouldn't watch them.
Thanks, kid.
Buy Oreo and get a chance to win big.
Michael Bay never provided enough quiet time in those films in order for us to become acquainted with his characters. And so when you look at a movie like Overlord and you see the sheer amount of quiet time that it has, because there are plenty of extended scenes of just straight up character development and not much action or even horror going on, you begin to see the rusty cogs turn and see that this film is actually going for a lot more than just spooks and booms. Like, for instance, the main character of Boyce. I'm sorry to say, but when the movie first started, I found him to be the least interesting character of the bunch. But then as the movie progresses, you begin to learn some stuff about him. You know, he learned French from his grandma. He's a pacifist who got drafted and can't even kill a mouse. He's also an altruist to a fault, allowing him and his squad to suffer the consequences of the choices he makes. Now I want you to look back and tell me anything about Josh Duhamel's character in the Transformers franchise. You want to know why you can't? Because you didn't get enough quiet time. Unfortunately, I think that this overall preoccupation with character development and just taking your time with your characters is something that is going to turn off a lot of audiences that are seeking more of a bombastic and fast-paced experience. And I'm not saying that it's wrong to go into a movie expecting that kind of experience, but I think going into this movie thinking that it's something that it's not is giving it a severe disadvantage. And I think if you approached it with more laid-back expectations, you'd be way more able to accept it for what it is. Which is awesome. It's awesome. Number 2. This movie is offensive to the memory of those who died in the Second World War. This is a criticism that is very tough to dispute because what someone considers to be offensive is really up to them. One of the main audience reviews on Rotten Tomatoes made the point that as a son of a World War II veteran, he found it particularly offensive that they're combining these very fantastical Nazi zombie elements alongside the actual atrocities that Nazis caused. And I get that. There's this really visceral clash between what is obviously high science fiction and what is clearly historical horror. And I can see where that would come off as historically insensitive. But rather than arguing that this person's opinion is ultimately wrong or that he's being overly sensitive, I want to instead argue that this film is working with these heavier themes in a way that validates its use of fantastical elements. If you look around you nowadays in today's modern society, you're going to find a lot of people who seem to not really get like what Nazis are all about and like what the Nazis were up to in the 1940s. There's been this growing desensitization in today's society towards violence, towards prejudice, and like straight up towards evil. Just evil in general. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that like in general people are becoming more okay with these things. I'm just saying that we're getting a lot more comfortable with seeing these things in our daily lives. Look at Twitter, for instance. Did you hear about that cow? Did you hear about the cow on Twitter? The large cow? Did you know that this cow is fake news? I didn't know this. This picture is of a gigantic cow, and you come to find out that it's all lies. This cow isn't large. I mean, it is, but it's like not that large. And I found out about that today, and I don't care if this dates when this video was filmed. I don't care, but it upsets me to find out that I was lied to about this. Alright, I'm sorry, I think in order for Overlord to effectively communicate some of like the real horrors that the Nazis perpetrated, especially in a popcorn action film where limited time is a factor, hyperbolizing and heightening the horrible acts of Nazis, I really think is a great way of better engaging with a modern audience. Now yeah, the Nazis in Overlord do some really bad things, because guess what? They're Nazis. Did you know this? Did you know Nazis did bad things? It says in this, I didn't know that. There are certain scenes in this film that I'm not going to go into detail about that effectively kill any fun that you were having. And I think it's important that those scenes are in the film because they remind us of how awful Nazis are and how awful the things they did were. I think it's important that the scary monster stuff in the movie should be fun, but the actual Nazi stuff shouldn't be. And I like the dichotomy that's happening there. Let's reincorporate Saving Private Ryan into the conversation. What does Saving Private Ryan say about the horrors and atrocities of Nazis? Well, it doesn't really. I would argue that Saving Private Ryan is more about the general futility of armed conflict and also about the systematic decimation of the classic family structure in the 1940s. I would say that Schindler's List does far more in encapsulating the evils of the Nazi regime. But we're not watching these two films today. Today we're watching Overlord, and these two films are pretty bulky, hefty dramas with runtimes that far exceed Overlord. So I think that the creators of Overlord wanted to present some similar questions and themes that Spielberg's World War II movies did, but they were trying to do it in a much more palatable and subversive way. Believe it or not, I think that Overlord clings onto this really cringy zombie gimmick in order to trick wider audiences into actually learning something. Even though the Nazis in Overlord are committing things that the real-life Nazis never did, their motivations are one and the same. Saying that the genetic testing going on in Overlord is allegorical to the obsession with eugenics and ethnic cleansing in real-life Nazi Germany, I think that's a valid point, and I really think that that's what the creators are going for here. But that's not going to change the fact that portraying Nazis in this way is going to turn some people off. And I think that's a shame, because even though it's such a ridiculous premise, I think that this movie is saying things about Nazism and about fascism, and it's making real statements, and I think people are going to miss out on that because they're afraid of being disrespectful, which this is. This movie is offensive. It is. I don't know if I proved my point there. Number 3, this movie doesn't have any zombies. You lied. You said this whole time there are zombies. Weirdly enough, this criticism sort of plays opposite the previous one that I was just discussing. I've ran into some people who feel pretty cheated with the sheer lack of zombies in this zombie movie. I gotta admit, this movie is pretty light on the zombie factor. I think there's like 5. I don't even know. I think 6. And I don't even think they technically meet most of the criteria for zombies. I mean, they're undead for sure, but I think they're more just like resurrected boogans. But I think that this and the previous critique are wrong in the same ways that they presume that this movie is about the monsters, which I really don't think it is. The experiments and the monsters are a primary element, but I wouldn't say that they are the primary focus of the movie. I would argue that Overlord is a World War II movie that has zombies in it, rather than a zombie movie that has World War II in it. Is that too much of semantics? I don't know. I honestly believe that the main point of Overlord is that it's about soldiers and about this loss of innocence that they experience through war. Every single character is either physically or psychologically altered by the end of the film. Boyce goes from like a reluctant draftee to a committed soldier. Tibbet goes from like this disenchanted asshole who is afraid of forming meaningful relationships to literally taking bullets for people. And I would say that Corporal Ford is probably the person with the flattest arc in this film, but he still changes. He goes from a guy who refuses to accept any point of view except his own to literally trusting his life in the opinions and decisions of another person. And I get the criticisms that these characters are shallow. They, at the very least, they are archetypes. Yeah, there are some laughable elements here. Joe Magaro's Brooklyn accent is hilarious, and I really hope real Brooklyn people don't sound like that. Wyatt Russell is just playing his dad, and I think that's awesome, but I can see why people would consider that to be dumb or shallow. It doesn't matter how deep a character is, it matters if you care about them. And I hate this criticism that cliche is bad. Bring them on. I'll watch a cliched character. We like cliche characters because they remind us of characters that we like. Frances McDormand's character in 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri is incredibly deep and conflicted, and I don't care. I don't care about her at all. I care about Tibbet. Little Tibbet. So yeah, maybe I extrapolated a little bit too much from a World War II zombie movie. Maybe I did that. So what? What are you gonna do about it? I'm in charge here. What are you gonna do? Stop me? It's too late. Already rendered. It's over. I guess all I'm saying is that when I see people who are apathetic towards this movie or have these kinds of criticisms towards this movie, I really don't get it. I don't see what it is at all. Isn't this what you want? This is a thinking man's horror action zombie movie. I never expected that those words would appear in that order in this universe. The action is compelling, the scares, aside from one sort of in the beginning, are earned, and the characters are empathetic, and you care about these characters, and I can see why they would rub you off the wrong way, but at the same time I don't. I'm sad these characters won't be in any more movies. I really am. Sort of a shame that J.J. Abrams sort of gave up on this whole Cloverfield extended universe, because maybe there would have been a chance of these guys doing some other stuff. That would have been kind of fun. But on the other hand, maybe it's a good thing that they're not part of this universe. But yeah, go watch Overlord. Because nobody else has. I mean, what do you have to lose? $8, $9? Tickets are expensive. I was trying to decide what I was going to wear for this, and I settled on something festive and tropical, considering the temperatures of Cleveland at the moment, so I hope you enjoy and you're welcome.